You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Welcome to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. As always, it's great to be behind the golden Dixie Heritage microphone. And this week, I'll be doing so talking with Keri Ross. Keri is the author of a book that was literally just released on Amazon.com. It is a book on dating, of all things. It's a book on dating after the age of 50. And we will talk briefly about that great book here at the beginning of the broadcast. But then we're going to talk about something very specific, and that is somebody who she wound up in a dating relationship with. And that is one of the Leavenworth 10, John E. Hatley. And so Keri Ross is John Hatley's girlfriend, fiancé. Of course, there's a lot of complications to that relationship because John is currently falsely accused, falsely convicted, and incarcerated in the federal prison in Leavenworth, Leavenworth, Kansas. It's a long story, and Keri is going to tell it to us. And so, without any further ado...
Hi, Edward. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. How are you this morning?
I am terrific. Thank you.
So our guest today is the author of the recently published book, Failing at 50, which is a book of basically what it's like to have to start dating again after 50. And I'm going to guess that you named the book Failing at 50 in some part because you've also were a career teacher and educator. So, Keri, welcome to the show. And I guess tell us a little bit about Failing at 50.
Well, thank you, Edward. I appreciate that. The book is actually called 50 and Failing Fabulously. Because you can't fail any other way but fabulously. And it's just kind of a poignant and humorous memoir about my life as a middle-aged woman who suddenly found herself divorced after being married for 30 years. And I had absolutely no idea how to date after more than 3 decades of just growing my career and raising my children. And also it was quite an eye-opening experience. And in the book, I just recount a series of funny and sometimes not so funny dating mishaps and traveling adventures that I had with a really good friend of mine, a platonic male best friend. And we traveled across the United States a lot and had a lot of adventures. And then somewhere along the journey, though, I found myself falling in love with someone who was incarcerated in Leavenworth, and that kind of changed my life and the course of it. And so that's kind of what the book is about.
You were an educator before writing the book. If I understand right, you actually taught English literature?
I did, yes, sir, for 19 years. And then I went into school administration. I was a high school principal, and then I went into the assistant superintendent's office, and I was the assistant superintendent for a small 4A school.
So was writing something that you were doing all along as you were teaching, or was it something that teaching literature all those years you wanted to write and finally did it?
You know, I wanted to write a novel since I was 16 years old. I actually fell in love with writing. I had a really great high school English teacher, Steve Waddell, and he introduced me to writing. He had his classes always write weekly journals and students had to keep their own journals and stuff. And he gave feedback to us. He was very positive about his feedback and showed us that we could be writers, that we could write and we could develop that craft. And so since I was 16 years old, I knew I wanted to write a novel. Unfortunately, in the school business, you're pretty busy. I was also, of course, raising my children and that kind of stuff, so I really didn't have time. And in December 2017, I retired. And when I did, I found that I had time to devote to some of those projects that I had wanted to do for a very long time.
So you have a master's degree in education, correct?
Yes, sir.
So I'm guessing you had to write a master's thesis, but it probably wasn't a work of literature. It was probably more of a technical.
I would tell you that the writing that I did for my master's degree was much drier. It was much more technical writing.
So where did you go to school in Texas? I assume you went in Texas.
I did. Well, I went a couple of different places. I started out in Stephen F. Austin University with getting my bachelor's degree, ended up getting married and transferred over to Sam Houston State University because I could drive back and forth and commute. Then I got my master's from Tarleton State University, and I began work on my doctorate at San Angelo State University. Now, I have not completed that doctorate, and I'm not sure if that's still on the to-do list or not.
Okay. So, Sam Houston State, if my memory serves, isn't that the party school in Texas?
Perhaps. I'm not sure, but I think all of them are to some degree party schools.
Okay. But tell us a little bit. I was reading your blog. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said Sam Houston is known for its education programs and also for its criminal law programs and stuff. When I first started on my degree, I wasn't going to teach English. That was the furthest thing from my mind. And I initially wanted to be in the FBI. So I started out a degree in political science, and I actually got the degree in political science. And my minor is English, and I ended up teaching the English. So it's kind of a crazy story.
Okay. And so, of course, we're going to talk about your book first, and then we're going to talk about, the actual reason for scheduling the interview, which is John Hatley's story. But since you mentioned that you went to school originally with the intention of being an FBI agent, did any of the things that you learned or any of the skills that you developed in your undergraduate studies, have any of those helped you in your advocacy for John and for others there in Leavenworth?
I believe that it has, because when I've been going through the primary documents, the record of trial and things of that nature that these soldiers have, I'm able to pick up on nuances and stuff in those cases that maybe other people wouldn't pick up on if they didn't have my background in political science, of course, which includes courses in criminal law and things of that nature as well.
Okay. And so I was reading your blog yesterday. And there was a portion of the book that was in there, and you were talking about some of the dates that you had gone on, and I guess these were dud dates, but then you kind of turned it around on yourself, and you said, but if you were to look at the date from their perspective, that they could have seen you as one of them. You said probably would have saw you as not really being able to maintain a conversation. Another one of them would have probably if they were describing the date instead of you, whereas you thought he was boring, he would have thought, well, she just slept through the thing.
Absolutely. Always different perspectives, and so I think that I'm aware enough that you can come at these situations, especially these dating situations, when both parties are nervous and have different expectations, and they come with different backgrounds to that date, and you can see that absolutely they could walk away with two very different impressions about what just happened.
If there's something in particular you want to share about the book, and then tell us how we can order the book, and then we'll move on and we'll talk about John Hatley.
Well, the book went up for sale Friday, so it's brand new, and it's my first book. I'm a brand new author, so I'm still navigating through this as far as how it all works. It is for sale on Amazon.com. It's called 50 and Failing Fabulously. I also have a website. It's KeriRoss.com. It's KeriRoss.com. And I have published the book under my maiden name.
And so in the process of that dating, you reconnected with somebody who you had met back in the late 90s, a family that you had been friends with, and at the time you were married and he was in the military, and there was nothing romantic back in the 90s. But all these years later now, fast forward to, I guess we'll call it the Trump years, and you reconnect with John Hatley, and he is in, of all places, a military prison in Leavenworth, Kansas. And so I guess tell us the John Hatley story.
Okay, I will. I will tell you that when I became the assistant superintendent at the school district, John's sister, Tammy, that I had known for years, became my secretary. And so, of course, as my secretary, we then began communicating on a daily basis and just became the best of friends. We were already friends, but we became even better friends. And she was one of my support people when I went through the divorce. She had always been there for me. It was a very difficult time in my life. And about a year after the divorce, when I was in this dating, when I finally started dating again and was kind of in that process, and I was going on these dates and just coming back to the office and relating my horror stories and stuff, she started joking around with me. She goes, well, I know someone who would be perfect for you, but he's incarcerated in Leavenworth. And of course, she was talking about John, and of course, I knew his story and everything like that, but I never imagined that I could actually connect with someone in Leavenworth and end up getting to know that person in such a real way, in a genuine way, and actually falling in love with him at that point, which is what eventually happened. So John he is a tremendous person. He is a soldier of 19 and a half years, highly decorated. He has received numerous awards. If you just look at the medals on his chest, you would just be so impressed. But it's never been about that for him. It's always been a selfless service. He's always put his men before himself. Even at his trial, this trial that we're going to talk about in a minute, his commanding officers testified that he was top-notch, the top 1% of NCO under their command, that he was selfless, that he was disciplined, that he was law-abiding, that he exemplified moral character. And there is not a blemish on his career, both before these accusations, and actually there's been no blemishes while he's been incarcerated in the USCB. In fact, he has never been sent to the SHU, which is a disciplinary action that they have in the USCB when a prisoner gets in trouble. He has maintained that high character and that high sense of honor that he has always had.
So what exactly did he do, or rather should I say, what exactly was he accused of having done that resulted in him being in Leavenworth rather than finishing out the other few months of what would have been his military career and retiring?
Well, John is incarcerated for the premeditated murder of 4 men of Middle Eastern descent. And it sounds like something like that would be an open and shut case, but it is anything but an open and shut case. Around March or April of 2007, a firefight occurred between John's unit and a group of Iraqi fighters. John and his men chased these insurgents to a house about 4 blocks away from the initial firefight. The house was occupied by women and children who said they were the men's wives. They ended up taking the men into custody and a large cache of weapons. There were 5 detainees that they took into custody. It was a routine scenario for American military to take Iraqi detainees into custody and then bring them to the COP, and often there not be enough evidence and whatever to hold these Iraqi prisoners, so they were ordered to take them back to the field and release them. John's side of the story is that that's exactly what happened. They were told to release them, and they took them to a canal area, and they released them. And he said it was common practice to release them on the outskirts of the sector. They didn't have to bring them back to their house, and oftentimes they did not. But this is where the story diverges, because about 10 months after this event took place, one of John's soldiers was being disciplined for striking in a non-commissioned officer, and he was receiving an Article 15 from John. And he had also been disciplined on several other occasions for different problems that he had had within the unit. And at this time, he brings the story to CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army, and says that that John and the men executed these 4 prisoners instead of releasing them. And so that's kind of where all of this began. So CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Division, sent first of all, let me back up. The first thing that they did was to try to gather information and to gather evidence that a crime had taken place, they wired one of the soldiers in the unit. He wore a wire for 3 to 4 weeks, and they received nothing. Even though he tried to get incriminating evidence, there just wasn't anything to be gathered. After that, they took and they got the soldier to take them to the place where supposedly the executions had taken place. And so they went to this site. There was a canal. They sent a 7-man dive team into the canal, and they were unable to recover any evidence whatsoever, any bodies, any bones, anything. They searched the ground site. There were no bullet fragments, no brass whatsoever, no bone fragments, no anything that would suggest that anyone had been executed in that site. So then the Army sent an investigative team to the house, the original house where the Iraqi detainees had been taken from, and they asked the families there, is anybody missing, or did anybody go missing approximately, and by this time it's somewhere between 7 and 10 months later, and they're saying, did anybody go missing during that time frame? And the families said no, that no one was missing from their families. So they expanded that to the neighborhood, and they asked people around the neighborhood, and they said, has anybody gone missing? Do you have anyone missing from this area, from this neighborhood? And, these detainees that were supposedly missing. And the people in the neighborhood said, no, nobody is missing. So CID could not come up with any evidence, forensic or physical whatsoever. They could not come up with any identified missing people. They didn't have any bodies. And so it just seemed like an open and shut case. But this was during a very highly politically charged time for the Army. This was after Abu Ghraib, and there was a push at this time to make sure that the Army was holding soldiers responsible. And quite frankly, the Army pushed because John was a big fish. He was a first sergeant. He was on the list to be master sergeant. And he was just a big fish to catch. And all they could hope to use as evidence was testimony. So throughout the next year, the Army started a very focused plan to get the men that were on the patrol to confess. And it's extremely interesting to me that even in the record of trial, the prosecution talks about this plan and how they divided the soldiers up into what they thought would be 3 tiers of culpability. And then they would start with the soldiers that they felt farthest removed from this alleged crime, and they identified them as tier 3. And what they did was they assigned discretionary punishments called Article 15s with no judicial proceedings. And then they turned around and offered them immunity in exchange for guilty pleas. This didn't take place in one interview. This would take place, each soldier had multiple interviews. And what I can see from the CID notes, it would take usually 2 to 3 times for CID to visit a soldier before they would finally get that guilty plea that they wanted. And they were using coercion, they were using threats, they were telling them things like, you're going to prison for life, you're never going to see your family again, and things of that nature to get these men to plead guilty. The Army has a nearly 98% conviction rate, and that's not because they only try crimes that they are sure the soldiers are guilty. It's because the system itself is very incestualized. The convening authority, the one who brings the charges, for instance, also appoints the jury, appoints the prosecution. Members of the jury are often in rank and command influence from the judge, from the convening authority that is on this case. It's absolutely incredible when you start to study it, because this could never happen to a United States citizen in a federal court, where we get a jury by our peers that is supposed to be an impartial jury that, doesn't have a relationship with the judge, for instance, doesn't have a relationship with the prosecution, for instance, But this is not the way the Army operates. They will tell you that a soldier is innocent and proven guilty, but that is absolutely not the practice that takes place. I had one of John's soldiers tell me that when he was in basic training, the Army said to him, if you ever find yourself serving on a court-martial, you are to assume that soldier is guilty or else he wouldn't be there. And I think that is that's in complete opposition to our rights under the Constitution and what the rest of us enjoy. So these soldiers go and they fight for the freedoms that the rest of us enjoy, but they do not enjoy, and the protections that they do not enjoy.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. When men find themselves facing a military tribunal, that they can request an attorney outside of the military system, that they can request a private attorney. Did John do that, or did he not know that he could do that, or just did not have the means to do that?
No, he actually did, and yes, they can do that. And he had a military attorney appointed for him, and that military attorney, as you said, is part of that system. So you can request a civilian attorney. You have to pay for them out of your pocket, which he did. Unfortunately, the military attorney that he had was I just really did not do a good job, to the point that after the trial, the civilian attorney that he had did not do a good job, to the point that after the trial, the military attorney, who actually sat and was there and kind of a little bit of a co-counsel, but she was not the lead, she apologized to John after the trial and said, I am so sorry, that is not the direction I would have gone, and that is not how I would have represented you. He was counseled by his attorney not to testify on his own behalf. At that time, you have to look and see where John's coming from. He is, first of all, trusting the U.S. military that he has served for 2 decades to get to the truth and to do the right thing. He is not aware at this point in time of the tactics of the UCMJ, and he is, not really aware that he is considered guilty and has to prove himself innocent. He is believing that since CID found no bodies and no evidence and no names and everything, that the truth will come to light. So he was actually shocked when he was found guilty of this crime.
Well, I know that. Go
ahead.
I was going to say, normally in a murder trial, one of the first things that you have to have is a body.
Right.
And so, with the absence of a body, everything else is hearsay and circumstantial.
Exactly. And, I can understand a murder trial if you don't have the body, if you know that someone has gone missing and has disappeared, even if you don't find a body. But when you have neither a body nor even a name, or in this case, multiple names, because we're talking about multiple detainees, but you have no bodies and no names, you would think that you would have to have some forensic or physical evidence of some sort. I talked to a local district attorney who said that he would never take a trial to case on simply the testimony of the co-accused without any corroborating evidence. He, of course, understands because a co-accused has, a different motive. These men that testified against John were all granted either immunity or a reduced sentence. None of them testified without getting something in return to protect themselves.
And, had that been a civilian trial, also, those who were testifying against him, their very testimony would have been called into question, by the very fact that they were, basically accomplices in the same crime who had cut a deal themselves. In other words, the testimony of a criminal is normally called into question by juries.
Yes, absolutely. But there's a political agenda behind this. We cannot get around the fact that there is a political agenda driving this, and that there still is to this day. John has come up for parole twice, and the first time he was actually granted parole by the board, but the Deputy Assistant to the Secretary of the Army, Francine Blackman, vetoed that. And we know that she vetoed it because he will not admit to guilt. She said she vetoed it because of the heinous nature of the crime, but yet the two co-accused who she had released after only serving 6 years, she signed on the bottom line, and yet they were convicted of the exact same crime. And when I say that, I want to use a little air quotes because my viewpoint from studying the case is 100% that there was never a crime committed. But she vetoed that because John has maintained his innocence. He has been told over and over by numerous people who understand the system that if he would just plead guilty, the Army would go ahead and let him out. But
well, what happens when he pleads guilty, though? Because then he has a murder conviction on his record. Obviously, there are negative consequences to pleading guilty.
There are no more punitive consequences that can happen to him as far as if he pleads guilty, because he already has a murder conviction. He is already a convicted felon. He'll already have to live with that for the rest of his life. But here is the one thing. John will not compromise his honor. The only thing he has left is his word and his honor. And he will not only will he not, testify or not plead guilty to something he didn't do, but John was asked and given the same opportunity for a deal that the other men were. He was given the opportunity for immunity and all of that if he would have implicated his ranking officer. And John told them, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to implicate somebody when there's nothing that's been done wrong and there's nothing to implicate here. And so, I think that's interesting to know that he was offered the same deal. But John will sit in Leavenworth for the entirety of his sentence before he will, admit to something he didn't do. He just believes that's a compromise of his character, his integrity, and his honor, and he will not do it.
So when will his sentence finally expire?
He was originally given life. A clemency board reduced that to 40 years and then later reduced it to 25 years. He has served 10 of those years, which would leave 15, but he has also received the maximum time off for good behavior because his behavior in Leavenworth has been impeccable. And so the entirety left of his sentence that he will have to serve is about 9 years.
Okay.
But this man has given up his entire 40s. He was put in prison right before his 40th birthday, and he has now turned 50 there.
So I understand that his father's still alive, and you had said that his father is basically considering him to be a prisoner of war on American soil.
Absolutely. John's dad will turn 79 this year. His mom will turn 75. She has back issues and stuff, and it is almost impossible for her to make the trip now to Kansas to even visit her son in Leavenworth. And then if you've ever visited a military prison or anything like that, you know that you sit in hard plastic chairs for the entirety of the visit. And with someone with extreme back issues that she has, it's just nearly impossible. And he has lost his grandparents. They were in a car wreck while he was incarcerated. He lost them. This man has lost so much. And so my appeal is to the president, because I do not believe the Army is going to do the right thing in this case. They've had 2 opportunities to at least release him on parole, and they haven't done that. He's coming up for parole again in June. That process, though, takes a long time. He probably won't get an answer until January 2020. So just still even a longer period of time to sit in prison away from his family. You know, he's really been away from them for 3 decades, if you think about it, because he served in the military for 2 and was deployed and overseas most of that time, not all of it, but most of it. And then now he's spent the last 10 years in Leavenworth. So he has been taken away from his parents for 3 decades, and it is just time for him to be restored back to them.
So when you visit John there at Leavenworth, whether you're going or his father's going, are you actually able to be with him, to have contact with him, or are you separated by some kind of a barrier?
No, you're actually able to have contact with them. It kind of resembles like a cafeteria setting. There are a couple of vending machines. There are some small plastic chairs and plastic tables that you can sit around and visit. You can have minimal contact. You can, for instance, hold hands and stuff like that. But and you can sit and visit. Of course, the visits are guarded. There's a guard there in the room, and then there are guards outside of the room that are watching through 2-way glass and monitoring all the conversations and everything that happens and all during the visitation.
Extra, read all about it. If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. There's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed, and that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it. As I understand it, President Trump his claiming that he's working on pardons for all of the Leavenworth 10, of which John is one, and one of them was pardoned here just last week. Have you gotten any feedback at all from anybody in the administration regarding John's case, or has that been a one-way conversation so far?
We have actually gotten a little bit of feedback through like his lawyer, through Congressman Bill Flores of Texas is a very strong advocate for John, and he has been working with the pardon attorney's office for years, though. This has been going on since Trump actually took office. Knowing that Trump supports soldiers and supports the veterans and things of that nature, he has been a hope that he would look at some of these cases and restore these men to their families if they're still incarcerated, or, you know, basically return to them their good names and stuff with a pardon. John's case is a little bit different from some of the other ones that he's looking at, because a lot of the other cases involve an actual killing that took place during a war zone that was labeled, and I believe labeled falsely, murder instead of an act of war, which I believe these cases were. Many of these cases, the ones that I've reviewed. And so President Trump is a huge hope for these Leavenworth 10. And because John's case is slightly different, because he is claiming his innocence, because there are no bodies, there are no victims, there are no families, you know, John can't claim responsibility. He can't go and apologize to victims' families or do any of those things if there aren't any, you know, like you would normally expect for someone to receive parole or a pardon or something of that nature. So because his case is so unique and it's fairly complicated, especially with the other soldiers testifying against him, some of the other soldiers in the platoon, then it makes it very difficult and it's hard to understand, and you have to really study the nuances of the case. You know, the Army convicted him solely on testimony, and the interesting thing is that testimony conflicts quite a bit. It conflicts in whether, for instance, the detainees were standing or kneeling when they were executed, how many shots were fired. You know, there were 5 detainees, and yet John was convicted of killing 4. There is never any mention of the 5th detainee. And when John brought it up to his lawyer at trial, he said, you know, there were 5 detainees, not 4. His lawyer told him he needed to be quiet or they might charge him with another murder. But that type of testimony doesn't make sense. You know, those minor incongruencies that other people might not even catch or recognize make sense to me, though, when all of these charges are trumped up, when testimonies were coerced and coached and even rewritten. I have one soldier who tells me that the statement he wrote for CID, they took it away and they brought it back to him typed, and it wasn't even the same statement.
So did I catch this correctly when you told me earlier that they cannot even give him the names of the 4 men that he allegedly killed?
Absolutely. There are no names. There are no identified missing men. There are no identified victims. There are no bodies. There is no forensic evidence. There is no physical evidence whatsoever.
Which, you know, leads me to a bigger question, that there were 5 men who were detained and questioned in a military facility, and then they were released. And at no point during that process did anybody even bother to ask them their names?
Apparently so. You know, I don't have privilege to what happened with those detainees as far as whether or not when they questioned them, they got their names. When CID went to the families, though, of these alleged victims to find out if they were missing, they didn't even take the family members' names to say, okay, here are the family members who say that there's nobody missing. And, you know, I've had to try to wrap my head around this because it absolutely seems so sloppy. But in the long run, it actually helps their case, because if we had some names, we could go and prove that these people are living. But when you don't even have names, how do you prove your innocence here? That's my question. How do you prove your innocence when there have been no identified victims?
I mean, the whole thing is just hard to wrap your head around. And I guess that leads me to the next question, and it's a subject that you've written about on different occasions, and that is just how screwed up the Uniform Code of Military Justice really is.
Absolutely. And of course, that is the one thing that John and I want to continue to fight for, even if he is released, because he knows that this kind of travesty has not just happened to him, but to other soldiers. And the general public needs to understand that the UCMJ is a very messed up system. And you're thinking about these mothers and fathers who send their children off to war zones and stuff, and they're trusting the U.S. military to do the right thing. They have no idea of the dangers that their children are in that have absolutely nothing to do with war because of this process, because of the fallacies of the UCMJ.
Specifically, he's got attorneys and he's got other people who are advocating for him. But specifically, what have you been able to do to advocate on his behalf?
Primarily, I write because that's my area of expertise. So I've written articles. It is really important for me to get the truth about his case out there. I vet everything that I write through the record of trial, through conversations with John, through conversations with his attorney. If I write about another soldier, I talk to their families or whatever, or to their lawyers or whatever. I'm very careful about what I write because what I would like to do is to get the truth out there. And I've also, of course, written numerous letters to senators and to representatives from not just Texas, but all over the United States. I've written to the president, written to the local newspapers and stuff. In fact, I'm waiting for an article right now that's supposed to come out in our local papers in the next few weeks. I am working with his webmaster, Rose Lipscomb, who has set up a website for John, and she has also set up a Facebook page, and she has written a petition, and that's on change.org. And so we're just getting as many signatures as we can for that petition just to somehow get the attention of the White House. John has numerous soldiers, though, who can attest to his character and his leadership. And one of those soldiers actually has been able to go and advocate on his behalf at the White House as well. So we're just hoping that somehow all of these things will make a difference. But we are fighting a big machine. The Army is a big machine.
So what is the John Hatley website?
Free John E. Hatley. So FREEJOHNEHATLEY.com.
Okay. And what is the Facebook page?
It is his name as well. I think it's under Pardon John Hatley.
Okay. And so what specifically...
I think that's instead of just John Hatley, if you will search for Pardon John Hatley, you will find his Facebook page.
Okay. And what specifically can our listeners do to help John? How can they advocate for him?
Absolutely. If you could continue to voice your opinion and to write the White House, to write your congressman, to support Trump in looking at these Leavenworth 10 cases, you can call the White House. They will record a brief comment for the president. If you could just say, please pardon Johnny Hatley. These are just, to reach out. If we can get as many people as we can to reach out and to support what Trump is doing. Trump is taking some flack, actually, for pardoning these military men because, there are people who just assume they don't know the facts of the case, and basically they just believe he's pardoning cold-blooded killers, and that's not the case at all. So take the time to really become familiar with the details of the case. Connect with me. You can connect with me on my website or my Facebook page, and I have links to articles and stuff of that nature on my Facebook page. And just network, get the word out, and support the president. Let your congressman know you support these actions, and write letters and make phone calls. Find the petition. The petition is at change.org. If you will go to change.org and search for John Hatley. The petition will come up, and please sign the petition and leave a note of encouragement.
Okay. Can John receive letters at Leavenworth, or is there a limited list of people who he can receive letters from, or could anybody write to him? Or
Yes, you can write to him. Now, he is limited on his visitors. You had to have known him prior to his incarceration, but he can receive letters from anybody, and you can write to him at John E. Hatley. You have to include his ID number, which is 87613. The address is 1300 North Warehouse Road, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, 66027, 2304.
the North Carolina Heritage Political Action Committee was organized by concerned citizens of North Carolina in 2015 in response to the increased attacks on North Carolina's history and heritage. The North Carolina Heritage PAC supports state and local candidates for public office who pledge and show their support for the protection of Confederate memorials and the preservation of all of North Carolina's history. We all know that Confederate memorials and symbols are the easy targets, and that the end game of our leftist enemies is to erase and rewrite all of history, from the colonies to the War on Terror. If we fight them for our state's rich Confederate history and heritage, we may be able to stop them from their mission of total destruction. Join the North Carolina Heritage PAC now by visiting ncheritagepac.org. Once again, that is www.ncheritagepac.org. And help us on the front lines of North Carolina politics. The mission statement of North Carolina Heritage PAC is that the North Carolina Heritage PAC was created with the purpose of supporting diverse efforts to defend and preserve the heritage, traditions, monuments, cemeteries, flags, emblems, and other legacies of North Carolina history against those efforts to remove, deface, legislate against, alter, and otherwise corrupt or pervert their meaning, history, presentation, and standing in our state. Once again, www.ncheritagepac.org. I'm guessing John is in like the regular population there at Leavenworth. He's not in solitary confinement or anything like that?
No, he is in the regular population. He has never been sent to solitary, or what they call the SHU, that they send you there for disciplinary reasons and whatsoever. He's actually saved a life while he's in prison. He's just really a good guy.
So have you actually been able to see his cell and his living conditions and things, or just his just the visitor's room?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Visitors are not permitted to go anywhere except for the visitation area.
Okay. I'm curious because, at least romantically, at least on a relationship level, you and John did not connect until after he was incarcerated. So you go to Leavenworth to visit him. He's the brother of an old friend and so forth. But what did you see, or what did he say, or what caused that connection to take place in such an awkward setting?
I don't know, because it was certainly not anything I had ever planned on. The first time I ever wrote to John was because I went to work one day and Tammy was down in the dumps. She's normally a very positive person, and I write about this in the book, by the way. And but I go to work that day and she's down in the dumps, and I pull her aside and ask her what's going on. And she said that they had just gotten the results from John's clemency hearing, and although his sentence had been reduced, they thought that might make him immediately eligible for parole. And they found out at that time, this was 2016, that it did not, and he would have to wait for another year just to be eligible for parole. So she was down in the dumps because she knew that her brother at that point was going to at least spend another year in prison. Now, this has been 3 years ago, so obviously he spent a lot more time than that in prison. So I ended up writing him that day, kind of on her behalf, just because I really felt for the family and I didn't know what to do or how to help. And to my surprise, he wrote me back, and we became pen pals first. We just started writing, and we have written lots and lots of letters. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head right now, but I think he wrote me like 219 letters over about the next year and a half. And, of course, I wrote him probably just as many. And so that's how we started getting to know one another. But then we started talking on the phone at one point. And then after I started talking to him on the phone, I just told Tammy, I've got to go up there. I've got to go to Leavenworth and see John. And so then I started visiting. And I probably visited about once a month. And just, I don't know. Maybe because I know his family, maybe because I knew his story. You know, I had known him for so long, and I know his character. But you know, and I just really got to know him and because of the unnatural situation and all, we had to get to know each other in a way different than most people would. And so we talked about everything. I can't tell you the number of questions that we asked each other back and forth, and we really dug into feelings and beliefs and things of that nature, and just took the time to get to know one another. And I couldn't tell you exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way I fell in love with the man.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, here's a man who was convicted of murder and so forth, but yet obviously, you know, there was something in his character and in his personality and in his whatever that you know, you were able to see past those accusations and see something that's very endearing to you. And so I guess that was the point of, you know, trying to find the real man versus the you know, the byline on the court transcript.
Right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm not alone in that. People that know John write me all the time, and they tell me what a wonderful NCO he was, what a friend he was, you know, how his character is impeccable, how he was the best leader they've ever had, you know. So I get that kind of feedback all the time. I'm not alone in my feelings of that this man is an exceptional man with exceptional character. And, you know, I had to, you know, get past the idea of that, you know, I was having a relationship with someone in prison. That just sounded, I guess you could imagine how that must have felt and sounded even to my family for a while and whatever. But, you know, sometimes you have to look past the circumstances and you have to see what is really there and what the truth is and what really matters about someone and their character and their honor and their integrity and those kind of things. And so that's just what happened here.
So if,
you know,
if my memory serves, go ahead.
Yes. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if my memory serves, the drive from Waco, Texas to Leavenworth is probably about 7 or 8 hours.
No, it's actually, from where I live, it takes me about 10 hours to get there. 9 or 10, but, you know, that's with stops. But it takes me about 9 or 10 to get there.
Okay. I used to live in Wichita, and I'm trying to remember how long it took me to get from Wichita to Waco. And then, of course, you know, it's another couple of hours up to Leavenworth from Wichita. But 11 hours. And you make that trip once a month.
About.
So when you drive up there, how long do you actually get to visit with him? I mean, I'm assuming you have 20 hours in travel back and forth, and for how long? A half an hour, 2 hours?
Well, it's actually, if it's a weeknight, it's a 2.5 hour visitation time. So like if it's Monday through Friday night, you get 2.5 hours. On Saturday and Sunday, you can go 2 separate sessions, and each session is 3 hours long. So you can actually visit for a total of 6 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Okay. And I know this is kind of an awkward question, but at one point, you and John had actually broken up, and he was kind of the one who initiated that. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think if you read the book, you'll kind of understand why, because what John and I actually broke up for a while after he did not receive his parole. I think it was just too much. He just felt like he could not ask me to endure and to have a relationship with him, knowing that he faced at that time what was another 10 to 11 years in prison. And so, you know, we just decided, okay, we just need to be friends. And, you know, I've continued to support him and all, but inevitably we just end up drawing closer again. And so, you know, it's a complicated situation for us.
You had also told me about a gentleman named Don Brown and that he is in the process of writing a book.
He is. Don Brown is a New York Times best-selling author. He visited with John about a month ago and requested permission to write a book about John. He has already written a book about another soldier that is currently right now, I believe, on the New York Times bestseller list. It's called Travesty of Justice, and he wants to write about John next. So we're very honored that he wants to take on this task, and we, of course, hope that, we hope John is out of there well before the book is published, but we hope that the book will help explain to people the nuances of this case and how things came to be the way that they are. I am also probably going to write a book about John as well. I'm kind of waiting till I talk to Mr. Brown to see if he wants to collaborate or if we're going to write two separate books and go different directions with him. Of course, I've already written about John in the other book, but that was just a humorous and personal book and not a serious book about that details John's conviction and incarceration.
So is there anything else about John's story or about your book that I should have asked you and you didn't get the opportunity to tell us?
Well, I'm trying to think. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I just want to make an appeal to President Trump to please consider sending John home to his parents and his loved ones and his family. They miss him incredibly. He is an awesome and amazing man. He is a zero threat to society. In fact, he is a loved member of the community, and our community wants him back. And we just ask President Trump to please not wait on the Army, because we don't feel like the Army will do the right thing, but to please release this, prisoner of war on American soil, as his dad says. I would like to thank the listeners for taking the time to listen to the story and to have an open mind about it, because sometimes it's very easy when someone is incarcerated just to assume that they are guilty or that anybody who says they're innocent in prison has to be lying. I will tell you that these Leavenworth 10 cases are not typical cases, and they deserve to be looked into.
I was going to say, if there's ever any, you have my email address now, and you have my phone number, so if there's any advancement on John's case, I hope you'll let me know, and if we can help out in any way in the future, we'll be happy to do so.
I absolutely will do that. I thank you so much for this opportunity to share my story and to share the fact that I've written a book. I appreciate that, and thank you very, very much.
All right. God bless you, Keri.
God bless you, too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Breaker one, might be crazy, but I ain't dumb. Crazy Cooter coming at you. Hey, y'all, got your ears on? Well, I got some news for you. We're here at our brand new Cooters in the Country store in Sperryville, Virginia. Good old Sperryville, where Cooters started many years ago. Folks are coming from all over Hazard County, and we're going to have a grand old time with good music, good food, and best of all, good friends. Hope y'all can be there. Whoop, whoop, here come Enos. Huck got Cletus with him. I'm down and I'm gone.
I would like to thank Keri Ross for being our guest today, and I would also like to encourage all of our listeners to do everything that they possibly can to support Johnny Hatley, because he truly is an American hero and he is definitely deserving of our support. Call the White House switchboard. You can look up the number on the internet and record a message for President Trump. I don't know that he listens to all of them, but certainly if whoever does listen to them hears hundreds and maybe even thousands of messages in support of John Hatley, that will get their attention, and definitely at least a memo of that will be given to the president's attention. Also, go to the freejohnnyhatley.com website or type in Free John Hatley there at Facebook. I've done that, and the Facebook page comes up. Sign the petition. Do everything that you can to advocate for John. Write to him at the address that was given earlier in the broadcast, or look up the address of Leavenworth Prison and write John Hatley. Just send him a note of encouragement. Let you know that you're praying for him. Let you know that you appreciate his service to our country, and let him know that you have advocated on his behalf to the president and others. Would also like to encourage you to go to my website, www.dixieheritage.net, When you're there, sign up to receive our free Dixie Heritage newsletter. You'll receive it in your inbox each and every Friday, absolutely free of charge. And when you sign up there at DIXIEHeritage.net, we'll even send you a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. And then, of course, also go to KeriRoss.com, check out Keri's book as well. From all of us here at TBR Radio presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, thank you for being our guest. Come back same time, same place next week. We'll have another great show for you. Until then, God bless.